bring in Sara Yael Hirschhorn for more insight and analysis on the situation. She's a visiting professor at the University of Haifa. Sara, good to see you again on the program. Now, Republicans have long gone after elite colleges as bastions of, quote, wokeism, especially when it comes to race and gender. But in this case, it's argued the same protections don't apply to Jews. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think there's been an institutionalization of the idea that Jews are part of a white upper class in the United States that do not seem to be particularly oppressed or suffering from problems of assimilation or economic deprival in the United States, and therefore they are not considered part of a larger minority category in the United States, despite the fact that Jews are only 2% of the population and suffer from both physical and verbal violence of anti-Semitism on a daily basis. But much of the diversity, equity, and inclusion frameworks often don't include Jews as under their purview. We heard that even 2 weeks ago from the disclosure from Harvard that Jews were not a category treated by DEI. And a larger understanding in the American identity politics matrix doesn't fit conveniently for Jewish status, which both, of course, have Jews have assimilated quite well in American society, but also suffer from anti-Semitism, and the kind of binary there is difficult to fit within existing frameworks, and unfortunately is being quite politicized in our current political climate.
What about on Nathan's point there that younger generations on college campuses in particular and in broader America tend to support the Palestinian cause while the majority of older Americans support Israel? What do you say to that? And is this a case of, you know, whose version of free speech matters more?
There's certainly a generational split when it comes to the question of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. We can see that in many, many surveys that show that Americans age 18 to 35 have very different opinions than Americans age 50 to 75, say. And that is important. It also is based on a party split that today most people who are considered pro-Israel are increasingly gravitating towards the Republican Party, while the Democratic Party, especially the left wing of the Democratic Party, is increasingly publicly espousing pro-Palestinian positions. There are also denominational splits within churches, synagogues, and other religious institutions along these lines. I think there's also quite a lot of ignorance about what students are really supporting. My colleague Ron Hasner at University of California, Berkeley, commissioned a study of students on the campus about the slogan "From the River to the Sea," asking students to identify which river and which sea were at stake in this slogan. And it turned out that only 47% of students could actually answer the question correctly about which river and sea we were talking about in this famous slogan that is pronounced frequently by pro-Palestinian groups. So there's many different things going on. I think when it comes to free speech, I don't think that tackling or combating anti-Semitism is a limit on free speech, but there certainly are concerns on university campuses that espouse free speech as perhaps the primary value of education, about having all voices and viewpoints heard. And we'll have to see whether there is a real issue here at stake or whether this is a way to divert attention from core questions.
In terms of the actual hearing this week, the aim was to address anti-Semitism and Islamophobia on college campuses. Now, the Council on American-Islamic Relations say that reports of bias motivated by anti-Muslim, anti-Palestinian or anti-Arab sentiment rose by 172% in the 2 months following the October 7th attacks. So there was barely any mention of Islamophobia at the hearing this week. Do you think that, there is also a bias in Congress, and at this hearing in particular, those who are asking the questions have their own political cause behind them?
So certainly there's been a politicization of these questions, but I'm not sure that anti-Semitism and Islamophobia actually go together so well and should be tackled, at the same hearing. I think
it was supposed to be tackled at the same hearing.
Society.
That was the point. It was supposed to be tackled at the same hearing.
Well, I think they're very distinct problems in American society, and they have different sources and root causes. The fact that this hearing seemed to focus more on anti-Semitism seems to be because anti-Semitism is also skyrocketing in America, up 600%, I believe, in the last few months since October 7th. And the noticeable climate of anti-Semitism towards Jewish students, of verbal and physical violence, has escalated dramatically. So I'm not surprised that the focus was mostly on anti-Semitism, but I think that it would be better to treat Islamophobia as a separate category so that it does get more attention. Yet, at the same time, I'd like to mention that the executive director of CARE made some very appalling comments when it came to the October 7th massacre, and CARE has actually been removed from the Biden's administration task force in combating anti-Semitism. So this is perhaps another reason to suggest that these two phenomenon are both interwoven, but also should be tackled separately.
At the same time, though, you know, when the shooting of the small Palestinian boy happened and the shooting of the 3 Palestinian students happened, you know, there was no hearing in regards to Islamophobia.
Look, I think that these things certainly deserve attention, particularly the last shooting that took place with students in Vermont. I understand that one of the students is now paralyzed for life. I hope that these will be adjudicated within our court system, that they have arrested the perpetrator. I'm not sure that he's been charged with the crime or the new crimes now, and I certainly hope that he'll be prosecuted to the full extent of the law, as with the case in the suburbs of Chicago in October. So certainly the courts need to be involved here in the prosecution of these crimes, but I think it would be important for Islamophobia to be a subject of a further public hearing. I hope that that may go forward while not I guess, diminishing the need for attention toward anti-Semitism as well.
Sarah, if I may, just because your perspective is so valid and interesting, I think that it's important to try and get across to our international viewers here in the United States. Even some Jewish experts argue that anti-Semitism is being weaponized by conflating the criticism of Israel's policies with anti-Semitism. What do you say to that?
Well, I think the criticism of Israeli policy is very different from challenging the right of Israel to exist and for Israel to exist as a Jewish and democratic state. So it really depends on what the nature of the critique is. A critique that essentially is calling for the abolishment of the state of Israel, or for a genocide of the Jewish people, or for anti-Semitism or anti-Semitic violence overseas certainly is far beyond critique the Israeli government policy. But sitting here in Jerusalem, I don't know a single Israeli who doesn't critique Israeli government policy on a daily or hourly basis. That is within the, certainly that must be considered within the definition of, legitimate critique of the state of Israel. I think the questions are deeper about the very establishment of the state of Israel and what that means as a form.
Sarah, as always, really appreciate your insight. Thank you for extending your time. Sara Yael Hirschhorn for us there.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.